it,
Okay.
but I'm not
Okay.
fully aware.
Okay. Sure. No problem. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So yeah. See, Datapower, it is an hardware actually. Many people get confused thinking it as a software, but it is an hardware appliance. So it is around like 1.7-inch thick rack mountable device. So why do we use this Datapower? Datapower is mainly used for two reasons. One is transformations and the other one is security. Okay. So transformations in the sense converting a message from one format to other format. For example, let's say XML to SOAP, SOAP to SOAP, or a JSON message to a SOAP or vice versa, or an MQ fixed format message to a SOAP. So anything. That means any to any transformations is possible in Datapower. Okay. Let's say, for example, I have a consumer. So these are the common terminologies that we'll be using the Datapower. Consumer, or you can say it is also as a front-end client, store, or the backend, or you can say provider. Provider are the server, the backend. These are the common terminologies that we are going to use. Provider is the one who is going to host their applications, and consumer is the one who is going to consume those applications which are hosted by the backend. Now let's say I have a consumer, or like this. Let's say http://www.flipkart.com. Let's assume that, for example, I have a consumer over here, and let's assume I have a backend application which needs to be consumed is this, which is an HDFC net banking. Now if you observe here, I have a client who is on an HTTP mode, but I have a backend application which is on this HTTPS mode. As you know, HTTPS is more secure than HTTP, and we cannot make a direct call from an HTTP application to an HTTPS application. Right? The protocol will not match with each other. So only an HTTPS call can be made if I want to make a connection with this HDFC banking application. So how can I do that? But I cannot change my system. See, let's say I will make this as an HTTPS. Let's assume that my consumer is also willing to change his application itself at his end so that he can meet the needs of the backend. But let's assume he is not only interested in this particular application, he might also need some other application. Let's say like it might be an HTTP or it might be an MQ kind of a connection. So in those cases where you don't require your consumer or your backend to change their systems, what we have is Datapower. So what we do at the Datapower is, this is how the flow looks like. And also let's say my consumer, he can only send an XML message, but my backend, he can only process a request if it is in a SOAP format. He cannot he cannot process the request if it is in any other format except SOAP. Now in these scenarios as well, so what we do is we introduce Datapower as a middleware over here, and what we do is consumer now can send an XML message over an HTTP protocol, and we do those transformations and as well as protocol conversions. So protocol conversion is nothing but converting like from HTTP to HTTPS, an MQ connection, FTP, SFTP, all the possible protocols can be handled in the Datapower. So what I do, I convert this XML message into a SOAP message and I send it over an HTTPS protocol. Thereby, there is no need for because see, whatever the backend was expecting, I am giving the same to him. Okay? So there is no need for my consumer to change his system. So we are meeting whatever the guidelines that is being set by the backend. So in this way, we can make our message transformations and the protocol conversions, which plays a crucial role in all the applications and in all the real-time organizations. Okay, so most of them, if they need this message transformation, say you might also aware of this particular technology called message broker, which is again similar to Datapower, so which also does these transformations and all. So what is the main difference between the message broker and Datapower is, Datapower, it's a hardware. As I said, it is basically designed for XML processing. So since it is a hardware, the XML processing will be very fast, and the reusability of the services, availability of the services is more in Datapower. Okay. So we can make all these protocol conversions, message transformations being implemented so that we can configure our Datapower services using which my consumer and provider can talk to with each other. See, they cannot make a direct connection with each of them. They have to make a call to Datapower, and Datapower internally will call the backend, which is on the request part. Similarly, on the response part, my backend will respond back to Datapower first, and Datapower will respond back to the consumer. Because when the backend responds to Datapower, it will send a SOAP response only. Now I want that SOAP to be converted into an XML, and I will send that XML response back to my consumer. Okay. So this is what we do at the Datapower. So what are we going to do? Like, what are we going to configure? We are going to configure Datapower services. Okay. Basically, you can say it's in a web service again. Okay. So the basic Datapower URL will be HTTP or HTTPS, depending upon the protocol that you wish to use, followed by Datapower's IP address, colon, port number, followed by service URI part. Okay. So we are going to construct the Datapower service, and accordingly we are going to configure this Datapower URL, and we are going to give this URL to our consumers, so that whenever they want to utilize this backend application, they will have to hit the Datapower URL. See, they are not going to, as I said, they are not going to directly call the backend. So they are going to call this intermediate Datapower service URL, and at the Datapower we accept the request, and then we do the transformations if it's required, and then we are going to call the actual backend. So there is no direct contact between the consumer and provider. Everything goes through Datapower only, either in the request side or in the response side. So our main agenda is to configure the services, accordingly give those Datapower service URLs to our consumers, so that they can consume our Datapower services. Okay. So as I said, if I need to do these transformations, like converting the messages from one format to the format, we use a language called XSLTs, XML transformation. XSLT forms the basics for all the transformations that we use in Datapower. See, in Datapower you can say 70 to 80% work that we do is based upon configurations that we need to learn, and 20 to 30% would be transformations, or you can say coding, which uses XSLTs. Again, it depends. See, most of them how they use in the real time. Like some of the organization, they don't use Datapower for the transformation purpose. They just use this Datapower for a security reason. So in those cases, there will be completely 100% configuration that you need to work on, where there won't be any requirement for them to work on the transformations. Because let's say my consumer will also send an SOAP message. My backend is also expecting a SOAP message, and the consumer is also making an HTTPS connection, and backend is also accepting an HTTPS connection. So in these cases, I don't require any transformations being done, because the protocols and as well as the message format is being sent is same as the backend is expecting. So we just use this Datapower as a gateway. So in those cases, the configuration will be 100%. But yes, as I said, in an overall way, if we look into that Datapower development, 70 to 80% will be the configuration, and 20 to 30% will be the coding part, which will be using XSLT. But again, depends upon the message format that we are going to use. Okay. And one more important advantage of Datapower, as I said, is security. When I say security, it's nothing but you can implement 2 layers of security in Datapower. One is transport layer security or SSL, and the other one is message layer security, which will be implemented using AAA, which is authentication, authorization, authority. So because of these security features, it makes a data power as a more powerful source. Okay, so we can make our data power services as secured. Because of these features, data power has been widely used. See, initially when the data power came into market, it was restricted only for the banking applications. So most of the banking applications or the banking organizations used to use them. But as of now, it has been widely spread across the retail market, health and life sciences, okay, insurance domains. Most of them, everyone started using this data power because of its availability and the features, whatever that we discussed. And see, the data power, it's an hardware. There are different hardware appliances. See, like how we have an, like let's say Samsung, we have like different phones, right? So similarly, we have an data power. We have different appliances. Each of them has their own specifications, like XA35, which stands for XML accelerator. XS40, which stands for XML security. XG45, which is a gateway appliance. XI50 and 52, which is an integration appliance. XML integration integrator. XC10, which is an XML caching. XB62, B2B integrations. So these are the different data power appliances that we have it in the market. Each of them has their own specifications, and the most commonly and widely used is XI50 and XI52, which is used basically as an integration appliance, and out of which XI52 is the most advanced data power appliance which every organization will be using. So these XI35 and XS40, these are little old data power appliances. So as of now, most of them, they don't work on this. So people prefer to work on this XI50 and 52. And as I said, out of which XI52 will be the most widely used across all the organizations. So let's say today you have started working on XI52, okay? And let's say after 6 months, you are being asked to work on XI50. Yes, absolutely it can work, because the way that you configure the services or the objects in XI52 will remain the same as an XI50. The only difference would be your internal data bus, memory management, little performance, and maybe like little additional features that will be added. So, but the way that you handle the service configurations in XI52 will be the same as you work on XI50. Okay. Any questions on this part?
So, I have a question. Like, I understand the DPA data power is a middleware, and it's a hardware. So in that case, is it near the client or near the provider or the consumer who is going to use? And how is it? Like one-time setup is required for the person to use this, or is one-to-one relation or one-to-many or many-to-many? How is it actually? How it works? Just to understand, I'm totally new to this. So and where exactly it fits in the industry?
Yeah, so we access this data power using a simple GUI. Okay, so we access this using a GUI. So whenever if a consumer wants to utilize this data power, he will have to subscribe to the data power by using the certificates. By using the digital certificates, we are going to allow him to use our data power services using an SSL connections. So every time any consumer, if they want to utilize our data power services, they will have to install our data power certificates at their end, so that we can make sure that whatever the consumer who is trying to make a call to the data power is a trusted source. So it's like, it's a one time, like every time, like he doesn't require, because say at any point of time at the data power I can have only one public certificate, correct, which can be used. So I can share this public certificate with my consumers so that I can expect them to carry that whenever they want to make a connection with the data power. So it's a one-time process that where they need to install or where they need to configure our own data power's public certificate at their end. So then it will allow us to, then it will allow them to use the those services.
One customer, one consumer, data power, and the provider, right? This is one.
Yes, yes. No, no, similarly, let's say you have a service, you can have requirements that such that you get a request from one consumer at the data part, but it has to be sent to multiple providers. Let's say you have different backend applications which are expecting the same message. So let's say you have one provider too.
Yeah,
Even this can
suppose here Flipkart is having HDFC like that. You may have some other banking. Maybe the customer choice to go with
yes,
HDFC or ICICI or somebody else. So in
yes,
that case, the server will reach, the different servers will reach via DP, right?
yes. DP will try to connect with all of those different servers.
Okay.
So all those possibles, like I can receive a single request from a consumer, I can send it to different backend applications. So that can be possible with the data part. Okay. So again, that's what, like if you are using an HTTPS connection over here, you will have to get the backend certificates. So you have to get the provider 1 certificate, provider 2 certificate, and provider 3 SSL certificates and configure the data part, so that they will allow us to connect to them. See here, consumer wants to connect to data path, but in this scenario, my data path is going to connect to these backends. So I will have to get those certificates on them and configure the data path, so that whenever I make a call to them, they will allow me by thinking as a trusted source. All this scenario is also possible. Like we usually use some of the cases we use is kind of approach as well. So because of these transport layer security or the SSL that we implement and the message layer security which you can implement on the message level, so it becomes more widely used because of these security features. And as part of the training as well, we are going to see, as I said, the most advanced data power appliance, which is XI52. XI52 is going to be, like we are going to see the same configurations of XI52 as well over here. So I'll be providing you the materials, access if you want. Yes, we can work on the access part of the data power appliance, wherein you can log into a data power appliance and you can configure and you can test the services and you can practice. And some of the real-time scenarios for the practicing. The course begins with the introduction to the data path. What is the data path? What are the advantages of the data path? What are the different data path appliances that we have it in the market? Okay, and then followed by security handling. As I said, one of the most important concept of data path being used is security. So when I say security, we are going to use digital certificates. So wherein we have public certificates and private keys. So how can I make use of these public certificate and private keys in the data path in order to make my data path services secure? So that will be the certificate configuration. So wherein you will have to create all these objects like a crypto certificate object, crypto key, crypto validation credentials, crypto identification credentials, all those objects. So what are those objects are? How do we utilize those objects for the security reasons? So that will be the certificate configuration. And what if Datapower itself has to generate its own public certificate and private key? Because yes, I would also need to give my public certificate with the consumer. So whenever they want to make a connection to us, right? So in those cases, how can I generate my Datapower's public certificate and private key? That is what we have as a crypto tools. Crypto tools is basically a function that is available in Datapower through which we can generate our own Datapower's public certificate and private keys. So how are we going to do that? So that will be discussed in the crypto tools session, followed by different backend connection with the Datapower. So whenever, say as I said, it's all between Datapower, it's between the consumer and data backend. It is Datapower which takes care of calling the backend. So when I want to call a backend from the Datapower, what are the possible ways that I can do? That is, like I have a static backend, I have a dynamic backend. See, the difference between this is when you say a static backend, the backend URL is always fixed. So that means irrespective of the message that you receive from the consumer, you are always going to send that message to the desired backend which you have configured. But if you have a dynamic backend, okay, so based upon certain conditions, let's say you have a parameter called a country code, okay. Let's assume that you have this scenario where you are receiving a parameter called country node, let's say equal to US. In that case, let's assume I have to send this request to URL1. Let's say test1 is the URL. And let's say, similarly, I have got another option called content code equal to India. So in that case, I will have to send this request to URL2. So when we have to do these kind of a conditional or a dynamic routing based upon certain conditions, so we go with this dynamic backend where the backend URL is not fixed based upon certain parameters. We can route our request from Datapower to the desired backend. And in real time, 90% of the services that we configure is based upon this dynamic backend itself. Static backend we rarely use, so most of the cases we go with the dynamic backend. So we implement this dynamic backend using an XSLT and an XML file. So how are we going to implement this this dynamic backend in Datapower? So that will be discussed in this particular. Okay. And then followed by complete SSL setup. As I said, we have to thoroughly understand what is an SSL profile, what is a crypto identification credentials, crypto validation credentials, what is the direction that you need to keep. Like in Datapower, we have SSL profiles as reverse, forward, and two-way. So what are the scenarios do we need to configure? Well, like when do we need to go with the reverse profile, when do we need to go with the forward and a two-way profile? So that will be the complete SSL will be discussed in this particular session. Okay. Then followed by XML manager. Every Datapower service is going to have an XML manager which can be used as an XML threat protector and also for caching purpose. So how can we implement caching mechanism in Datapower using an XML manager, which is the most important concept that needs to be understood. So we are going to see those topics of XML threat protections, caching mechanism which can be implemented. Okay. And since we are talking about Datapower, which is nothing but a web services, we will have to also understand the concept of WSDL and XSD, where WSDL stands for Web Services Descriptive Language, XSD stands for XML Schema Definition. So we are going to see what is a WSDL. So I'll be taking a sample example of a WSDL and I'll be explaining you what does a WSDL consists of, what are the components of a WSDL, and looking into a WSDL, what are the information that we can get which will be useful in our Datapower service configuration. So that will be discussed in the WSDL. Similarly, an XSD, which is a schema definition. So I'll be taking a sample example of a schema and I'll be explaining you what are the information that we can get it from a schema. So we're taking a real-time example as well, one of the existing services called a global weather service, and I'll be explaining the schema and the WSDL of that particular application. Okay. And as I said, we need to learn about XSLT part as well, as it is also one of the important concepts in Datapower. So we are going to see what is an XSLT file, what is a template, how to write an XSLT, what is a namespace, how do you declare a variable, how to use an if condition, a for each condition, a when condition, and once after we are done with that, we are going to see one of the important concepts in another Datapower is Datapower extension functions. So how do we use these Datapower extension functions using XSLTs? Because it also, the extension functions also plays a crucial role. So what are the different Datapower extensions functions that we have? How can we implement them using an XSLT? So that will be discussed in the XSLT session. Okay. Then followed by front-side handler. See, every Datapower service URL, if you look into the Datapower service URL, as I said, so you are going to have a port, a unique port assigned for each service. Port is the one where your Datapower listener will be listening, so that whenever a consumer sends a message on that port, your Datapower listener will accept it and try to process that request. So that means any request, if it has to be reached at the Datapower, it will reach only through port. So where are we going to configure these ports? That is what we have front-side handlers. We call it as an FSH. So we have different front-side handlers like an HTTP, HTTPS, and an MQ, which are the most commonly used. So in what scenarios do I need to use an HTTP or an HTTPS and an MQ? What are the differences between each of these configurations? So that will be discussed in this particular session. Okay. And then followed by processing actions. So we have some of the default actions which we use, like a AAA, which stands for authentication, authorization, and auditing. How do I authenticate my incoming request, and thereby I can authorize my consumer to utilize my Datapower service? So in AAA, we are going to see two different concepts using an LDAP authentication and the other one using digital certificates, which is the most commonly used. So we are going to see what are the differences in the configurations that we need to do for each of the type. And SLM, service level monitoring. It is basically to restrict the incoming message traffic. So how can I restrict my Datapower services by accepting a message? That will be an SLM. Similarly, a transform, match, result, sign, verify, encrypt, decrypt, route. So we have certain different actions. So we'll be seeing each of those actions, configurations, usages, and when do we need to configure and how do we need to configure them. Okay, and every Datapower service is going to have a request rule, a response rule, and an error rule, so that your request rule can handle your request message, error rule can handle your error message, and response rule can handle your response message. So how do we configure these processing rules, and what does each of these processing rules should consist of? So that will be seen in these processing rules. So these are, see, till now whatever that we discussed right from the certificate configuration, those are nothing but individual objects configuration. So once after we learn with the individual objects configuration, we are going to build an end-to-end Datapower service called WSP, which is nothing but Web Service Proxy. So we are going to construct an end-to-end Datapower service, which is Web Service Proxy, and then based upon that, we are going to test it using SOAP-UI. SOAP-UI is the tool which we use for testing the Datapower services. Okay, so we use SOAP-UI for the testing purpose. Once after we test it, how do I capture the logs at the data path? That will be the troubleshooting mechanism. What are the different ways wherein you can capture the logs, wherein we are going to see the usage of a probe to capture the logs, system logs, and different log levels. And also we have another important aspect called Datapower variables. Like we have a local variable, context variable, global variables, and service variables. So what are the differences between each of these Datapower variables? How can you declare those variables? In what ways we can utilize these variables in our service configuration? So that will be discussed in the troubleshooting mechanism. And if in case, if I am getting an error for my service, how can I handle that error for my service? So that will be there. Similarly, we are going to configure a simple multi-protocol gateway as well, which is another kind of service which will be commonly used in Datapower. So we are going to configure an entire end-to-end multi-protocol gateway, and we are going to test it and troubleshoot it as well. And we have one of the advanced topic called logging mechanism. See, in Datapower, what happens is, let's say if I have 10 services, okay, if there is any problem with any service, all the logs related to that particular service, or if like all the 10 services logs will be pushed into one default file, okay, one default log file. But what if I want to see only one of those my service specific logs? So it will be difficult for me because it contains all my service logs, but I want only one service specific log. So if you want to do that, you can customize your logging mechanism. Thereby you can configure an object called log categories and log target, which will allow you to save only your service specific logs. And also you can save the logs on the Datapower appliance itself. If not, you can push the logs into an external server. Also you can send it to a SOAP service, or you can send it as part of an email as well. So what are the different possible ways through which you can save the logs on the Datapower? So that will be the logging mechanism. So this the course is been designed in such a way that right from very basics, wherein a person who doesn't know anything on the Datapower, to the individual objects configuration, followed by end-to-end configuration of the services, testing of the services, and troubleshooting of the services will be covered. So that whatever that is required by the Datapower developer to work on, so all the concepts has been summarized over here. And also, if you are willing to take up the Datapower certification, yes, I can help you out in getting the certification as well from the IBM. So I have the dumps which you can share, which I can share it with you. You can just go through that, and accordingly you can take up the certification exam and get certified as well. Okay. Yes. Any questions? Yes. Any questions, anyone? Yes. Any questions? Clear? Any doubts?
No, we are good.
Okay. So it takes like minimum like 20 hours to 25 hours depending upon the like how quickly you can learn the things. So it requires minimum 20 hours for us to complete this.
In order to work on, you said it's all about a hardware appliance.
Yes.
So do we have a simulator or kind of like we'll be working on a real appliance, or do you have a virtual thing we'll be working on, like just for sake of practice, or how it works?
No, we will be using the virtual. It's a way the same. See, like you can either it might be a virtual or this. So it will be the same. So the way that you do it on a virtual machine is the same as it work on a physical appliance. And moreover, virtual will be very fast compared to your physical appliance.
Okay, so that will be remotely located somewhere, or you can download on your
No,
system and do the
it's not like a freeware actually. So we'll have to get it installed in the system. So like we will
okay.
have the VMware workstation being installed. So you will just you run this VMware in your machine so that you can connect
Mm-hmm.
to a data power appliance. See, I'll show you.
Okay. Workstation Pro?
Sorry?
Workstation Pro?
No, it's a no workstation. I have installed Datapower workstation 11, so which is like more compatible for our data part because the Pro like it's like the latest 12 version, right? So it's a limited version, and we need to get that key and all for the installation, and it has like some additional features. But it's workstation 11, so it work very well for us.
Okay. So does this require any programming skills, or just like who
Not
are
exactly.
going to?
Let's say the basics of XSLT would be fine. Anyways, as I said, if you have a basics of an XML, like what is an XML tag, how do we open a tag and how do we close that, yeah, that should be fine. So this is how the basic XSLT will look like. So it's more of that it's a kind of a syntax that you need to learn. Like let's say,
Okay.
like how do I use an if condition, how do I use a for each condition. So those cases, that's it.
Okay.
Like this is how you use a when condition, how to declare a variable. So it's basic, very basic. And moreover is whenever you join any project onto the data power, so there will be already predefined XSLTs. See, most of them what they do is they make it as a generic or a reusable style sheets. So we just need to use them in our data power services. So hardly, as I said, right, very rare cases we use these transformations or writing the code. So in more cases, in most of the cases, there will be already predefined set of XSLTs which you can use.
Okay.
So when this is how your data per GUI look like. So you will have a password admin. Sorry, you'll have a password. And you just log into your data power appliance like this. So it's a virtual appliance. So similarly, like how if you take it as a physical appliance, also it will be the same. But physical appliance it's very costly to get the access. So, let's just see here, right? This is
Okay.
so again, this virtual appliance is also being given by the IBM itself. So the way it works, the virtual works, it is similarly your physical appliance also works. Physical appliance, it's like one appliance. See, one data per appliance, I think it costs on like 80 lakhs, I guess. So that's fine. Like we can just practice everything. We can do anything, whatever that you want to do. We can just use this in the VM itself. And as I said, we are going to talk about XA52 only, which is this data power appliance. Yes, any questions? Yes, any other questions? Harish, Hari.
No, I'm good.
Okay, good.
Okay.
So is that only for the introduction, or do we have anything for?
No, I didn't get your question. Sorry.
I mean, is that only for the introduction, or do you have any other? I mean,
Uh,
about the tool or what?
No, this is how like this like the introduction part. So probably like if you are really okay, then yes, we can start up the sessions as early as possible, and whatever the timing that you feel that you are comfortable, yes, you can let Srinivas know about that. Probably we can plan accordingly, and I can take the sessions for you. So
Sure,
what will
sure.
be your possible timings?
Yeah, this is fine actually. This
So
time
morning
is
7 to
fine.
8 a.m. IST.
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, that
we
should be
can
fine. Yeah, I
we
will be
can cover
available.
up in a stretch. Actually, we can stretch for long hours and weekends. So,
Yeah, sure.
like, what's your pattern like? You'll be training every day, or like, what's your plan actually? Just
Yeah,
wanted to
see that's what
understand,
it
like,
depends upon the candidates. Like some of them they wish to have it on a daily session, or some of them they wish to have it as a weekend batches. So it depends upon you guys. Like if you are feel okay, if you want to continue, if you want to make it as a daily basis, yes, I can take up everyday session and 1 hour or 1.5 hour sessions.
okay, just out
And
of
some of them
your
what they do,
experience,
right? Yeah, no,
out of
like usually it is preferred that like we take 1 hour per day, so that you will also get some time to practice those. See what happens if I take it on a weekend. So once after the first weekend is done, so you will have to wait for another 6 days or 7 days. So again, you might forget little topics, and you might not practice on that. So if you have a daily sessions, so you will get you will so you'll also configure and practice the things whatever that we discuss in the sessions. So it will be very useful for you. So I would prefer like on a daily basis it should be good, because some of them what they do, right, they will be having they wish to complete the sessions within a week. So for them I stretch it for like 3 hours per day, like either 2 hours in the morning and 1 hour in the evening, and I just try to complete within 1 week. So but if you are if you